Well, I wonder whether you have ever felt so desperate, that you just felt completely cut off from God, even. It could have been because of circumstances. It could have been because of sickness or loneliness, finances or sin. But because of whatever it was, you felt like you were kind of in enemy territory, surrounded, and there was no way on earth that God could break through to you. That's often what depression can feel like. Like you're sealed in a box, cut off. No one, not even God, can break through and reach to you. But whether you've ever felt like that before, whether you feel like that now, the chances are that each of us at some point in our lives will go through something like that. Long-term sickness, depression, loneliness, bereavement, all of these can make us feel desperate and cut off, even from God, who couldn't possibly reach us. This morning we see a woman like that, a widow who's lost her husband. She's living in Sidon, the territory of the false god Baal, and she and her son are beyond desperate. They are moments away from starvation. But into this moment, into this desperation, God breaks through. This morning's passage is all about the God who breaks through, who crosses over thresholds for us. This morning, if you feel or believe that God can't reach you in your mess, life is too difficult, your pain, your sin, see this morning the kind of God that we have. See what God is really like. We have a God who crosses the threshold into our despair and into our suffering. Just two headings for this morning, just two headings to break this passage in half here. First of all, we're going to look at verses 7 to 16, the first half. And there we see the God who breaks through their enemy's threshold for us. We read, picking up in verse 8, the word of the Lord came to him, that is Elijah, go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have instructed a widow there to supply you with food. So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, would you bring a little water in a jar so that I may drink? As she was going to get it, he called and bring me a piece of bread. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home to make a meal for myself and my son so that we may eat it and die. God calls Elijah to cross over the border into the territory of Baal, out of Israel, into enemy territory. Remember, the faithless king of Israel, Ahab, at this time, had taken Jezebel as his wife, and Jezebel was from Sidon, where they worship Baal. And God says to Elijah, go into Sidon, cross over into Sidon itself, into Baal's territory. Cross over enemy lines into enemy territory. I want you to go there and bring my blessing and my favor to someone who's there. And you'll remember, don't you, from last week, that Baal was worshipped as the storm god, the god who the people of Sidon and wider Phoenicia prayed to when they wanted rain. And in judgment, Elijah had said there will be no more rain until the Lord, the God of Israel, says so. And so drought had come to the land, and Baal was proving pretty impotent. Baal was proving pretty powerless. He could not protect, he couldn't even provide for his worshippers in Sidon. But here the living God, the Lord, breaks through into Baal's territory and he brings life. Baal has been unable to provide even a meager piece of bread for this widow and her son. They've reached the end and they are preparing to die. Verse 12 is so depressing, isn't it? I'm gathering a few sticks to take home, make a meal for myself and my son, that we'll eat it and die. But the Lord breaks through and provides. Elijah said to her, don't be afraid, go home and do as you said, but first make a small loaf for me and out of what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, the jar of flour will not be used up and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. In this cosmic battle that's going on between Yahweh, the God of Israel, and Baal, the God of Sidon, it's 2-0. He's stopped the rain and he's still providing for the people. The Lord is reigning here. The nations around Israel believed that there were many gods, and each god ruled or reigned over a particular region or area. But here the Lord has the audacity to reach over into another land to save. He's not just the God of Israel, he's the God of the whole creation. This idea of God crossing thresholds, crossing over to bring blessing and salvation is something that the Bible's full of. In the great act of salvation of the Old Testament of the Passover, God reaches over into Egypt, into the land of Egypt, to bring his people out and save them. In fact, reflecting on that moment in Deuteronomy chapter 4, Moses says this, has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another nation by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, like the Lord your God did for you in Egypt? You were shown these things so that you might know the Lord is God, but besides him there is no other. Our God is the God who breaks through the enemy's threshold to save us. There are no boundaries, no barriers that can stop him or hold him back. He is the boundary transgressing, boundless God. The widow faced certain death and Baal was nowhere to be seen, but the Lord reached over, broke through, and saved. Whatever you're going through, whatever fears you face at this time, entrust yourself to this God, the God who will break through for you. You are not cut off. You are not too far away. Nothing is too much. We follow the God who breaks through the enemy's threshold for us. In these verses, God is revealed to be the Lord of life. He does what no other can do. He saves this widow and her son from certain starvation. He's broken through that threshold. But what about the threshold of death? What about when it's too late? Breaking into Baal's realm in Sidon is one thing, but breaking into the realm of death, surely that's too much. Verse 17 and 18, sometime later the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, what do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? Death has come and invaded the household. The Lord crossed one threshold to provide, but here's something far beyond that. To save the boy now, he'll have to cross over the threshold of death itself. So look at the second half of the passage. Verses 19 to 23, we see the God who breaks through death's threshold for us. Give me your son, Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried her to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I'm staying with by causing her son to die? He stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord, Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him. The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him and he lived. Christianity is a resurrection religion. We are a people of new life. Our entire faith rests on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so, to some degree, we're a little bit like a child who has the great fortune of living in a sweet shop. If you end up as a child living in a sweet shop, eventually extraordinary things become ordinary. And that can be the case as Christians. But this is extraordinary. This is the first resurrection in the entire Bible. Did you know that? We've been through Abraham and Moses and David, and we've seen some incredible things. But up to this point, in God's story of salvation, death has never been conquered. But here God does something he's never done before. He reaches down into the realm of death itself. He reaches beyond despair, beyond hopelessness, and he snatches out the boy from death's clutches. If Baal, the god of the storms, can't stop the Lord, then neither can Mot, the Canaanite god of death and the underworld. The Lord alone is Lord of life and death. And nothing, but nothing, can stop him reaching through to his people. He is the God who breaks through even death's threshold for us. And the truths of this passage are not just good news for that widow and her son. They are good news for everyone. Because the same God in this passage is the God and Father of Jesus Christ. What we see in this passage, we see beautifully fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus is the God who breaks through enemy territories and even death itself for us. That's what his incarnation was all about, when Jesus became a man. Since the fall, since our sin, we've been separated from God. And this world, the entire world, the region and the realm of the world, in some sense, in the language of the New Testament, has become a realm of sin, death, and the devil. And Jesus, in his birth, in his incarnation, launched D-Day. He broke through and entered into the fray, crossed over the threshold into this world. He put on human flesh, and he broke through to us. He broke through into the territory of this world for us. God is not the God of heaven alone. He is the God of heaven and earth. And Jesus came down here for us. But more than that, Jesus descended down to earth, but he descended further still. He knew that our real problem, our greatest problem, is that our sin leads to death. That's what the Apostle Paul says in his letter to the Romans. The wages of sin is death. Your sin will buy back death. And so we need rescuing from that realm of death itself. And so on the cross, taking our sin with him, he crossed over the thresh into death itself as he breathed his last, just like that boy did. And he went down into the grave, and in the grave he wrestled us out of death's clutches. With such a God, there need never be such a thing as despair or hopelessness. Jesus is the Lord of life and death. When we entrust ourselves into his hands, we can have confidence that we can face anything, even death itself. That's what we need to do. That's what this passage calls us to do. Baal could do nothing. Our idols can do nothing. Only Jesus Christ has the power to carry us from death to life. And all of us, every single one of us, will one day cross over that threshold into death. We don't know when it will be, but it will happen. That's guaranteed. But what Jesus has also guaranteed by his death and resurrection is that when we entrust ourselves to him, when we put our faith in him, he will break through and bring us to everlasting life. Let me pray.